Financial literacy isn't just about knowing fancy terms or having the latest investment app. Sometimes it's about understanding when someone is taking advantage of you. My son-in-law Bradley thought I was just a retired high school math teacher who didn't understand modern finances. He called me financially illiterate at our family Thanksgiving dinner. What he didn't know was that I'd spent 30 years teaching students how to avoid the exact trap he'd fallen into with his mortgage. I didn't want to embarrass him in front of the family, but when he doubled down on his insults a month later, I decided it was time for a real-world lesson in financial literacy. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The relationship between in-laws is often complicated. When you add money to the equation, those complications can multiply faster than compound interest. I'm Richard Donovan, 63 years old, retired after teaching high school mathematics for over 3 decades in Springfield, Massachusetts. Throughout my career, I made it a point to teach practical math, how loans work, how interest compounds, and how to read the fine print that financial institutions hope you'll ignore. My daughter Melissa met Bradley Carson 5 years ago at her law firm where they both worked as junior associates. Bradley came from what he called new money. His parents had struck it rich with a tech startup in the early 2000s. He'd grown up with wealth, but hadn't necessarily learned how it worked. Still, he had all the confidence of someone who believed money management was in his DNA. Melissa, on the other hand, grew up in a middle-class household where we discussed finances openly. She watched me clip coupons, calculate interest rates on loans, and save methodically for retirement. I'm not wealthy by any stretch, but I've always been comfortable because I understood the mathematics behind financial decisions. When Melissa brought Bradley home to meet us, I liked him immediately. He was charming, intelligent, and clearly adored my daughter. They married after a year of dating, and I welcomed him into our family with open arms. The first signs of tension emerged when they decided to buy their first home together last year. The housing market in their area just outside Boston had become increasingly competitive. Properties were selling within days of listing, often for well above asking price. Bradley was determined to get them into what he called their forever home before prices climbed even higher. "We need to move fast, Dad," Melissa told me over coffee one Saturday. "Bradley says we might be priced out of the neighborhood if we wait much longer." I nodded, understanding their urgency, but also concerned by it. "Just make sure you're not rushing into something that doesn't make financial sense in the long run." Melissa assured me they'd done their research. "Bradley has a friend at Capital Mortgage Solutions who's giving us a great deal. He says we'd be crazy not to take it." I felt that familiar twinge of concern. In my experience, great deals from friends often weren't as great as they seemed, especially in the mortgage industry. But I kept my thoughts to myself. Melissa was 32, a successful attorney, and certainly capable of making her own decisions. The home they eventually purchased was beautiful, a 4-bedroom colonial with a spacious yard in a desirable neighborhood with excellent schools. The price tag was steep at $975,000, but they both had good incomes. When they invited us over for a housewarming party, I brought a bottle of champagne and kept any financial concerns to myself. It wasn't until Thanksgiving that the subject of their mortgage came up again. We were gathered around their elegant dining room table, my wife Sarah, our son Michael and his wife Melissa and Bradley's parents, Robert and Diana Carson. The conversation had drifted to the economy, inflation, and rising interest rates. "I'm just glad we locked in our rate when we did," Bradley said, reaching for another helping of mashed potatoes. "Rates have gone up almost 2 points since we closed." "What rate did you manage to get?" I asked, genuinely curious. Bradley sat up a little straighter. 5.8%, fixed for the first 5 years. Then it adjusts based on market conditions, but by then we'll probably refinance anyway. I couldn't hide my surprise. "So you went with an ARM? An adjustable rate mortgage?" "It's not just any ARM," Bradley said. an edge creeping into his voice. It's a 5-1 arm with a great cap structure. My buddy Jason set it up personally. I nodded slowly, trying to choose my words carefully. Those can work out well if the timing is right, but they carry significant risk if interest rates keep climbing. Bradley's father chimed in. Risk is where the reward is, Richard. That's something the financially savvy understand. He gave his son an approving nod. I should have let it go. The warning signs were all there, Bradley's defensive posture, his father's dismissive tone. But I'd spent too many years watching former students struggle with predatory lending practices to stay completely silent. I just think with your income levels, a traditional 30-year fixed might have given you more security, even at a slightly higher initial rate. Bradley put down his fork. No offense, Richard, but mortgage products have evolved significantly since you bought your house 20 years ago. The strategies that worked for a math teacher's salary aren't necessarily what makes sense in today's market for attorneys at our level. The table fell silent. Sarah gave me a look that clearly said, let it go. And I tried to. I smiled and raised my glass. To your beautiful new home. May it bring you many years of happiness. The moment passed, and conversation drifted to safer topics. But something had shifted. I saw it in the glances Bradley exchanged with his father, in the slight tension in Melissa's shoulders. I'd been labeled the financially conservative father-in-law who didn't understand modern finance. A month later, we gathered again for Christmas Eve at our house. The evening was going well until Bradley began telling everyone about his year-end bonus and how he planned to invest it in a cryptocurrency his friend had tipped him off about. It's already up 300% this year, he said excitedly. This is the ground floor of something huge. My son Michael, who works in cybersecurity, asked a few pointed questions about the cryptocurrency's security protocols and use cases. Bradley had few concrete answers beyond growth projections. Dad, what do you think? Melissa asked, perhaps hoping I'd offer a diplomatic perspective. I'm probably too conservative for this conversation, I said, trying to avoid another tense exchange. I tend to stick with boring index funds and municipal bonds. Bradley laughed, but there was no warmth in it. That's exactly why most people never build real wealth, Richard. Financial literacy in this country is abysmal. People are stuck in outdated thinking, afraid to leverage innovative financial products. Robert nodded along with his son. The financially illiterate always fear what they don't understand. And there it was. I'd been called financially illiterate in my own home, at my own dinner table. I looked at Bradley, then at his father, and saw the same smug certainty in both their expressions. Sarah squeezed my hand under the table, silently urging restraint. I took a deep breath. You may be right, I said quietly. There's always more to learn about finance. The evening continued, but I couldn't shake those words. Financially illiterate. After 30 years of teaching financial mathematics, after carefully managing our modest income to put 2 children through college without debt, after building a retirement portfolio that would sustain us comfortably for the rest of our lives, I was financially illiterate? I might have let it go if I hadn't received a call from Melissa 3 weeks later. She sounded stressed. Dad, I need some advice, but please don't tell Bradley I called you. My concern was immediate. Of course, honey. What's going on? It's about our mortgage. I was reviewing some of the documentation, and I'm not sure I understand all the terms. Bradley keeps saying it's fine, but her voice trailed off, and I could hear her uncertainty. This was my daughter who'd graduated top of her class from law school, who could parse complex legal language with ease. If she was confused by their mortgage terms, something wasn't right. Would you like me to take a look at the paperwork? I offered. She hesitated. Bradley would be furious if he knew I was questioning this. He's very proud of the deal he got. Then he won't have any problem with a second set of eyes confirming how great it is, I reasoned. I promise to be objective, Melissa. 2 days. Later, Melissa emailed me copies of their mortgage documents while Bradley was away on a business trip. What I found left me cold. Their 5-1 arm was just the beginning of the problems. The mortgage included a prepayment penalty of 3% for the first 3 years, a margin of 2.75% above the index after the fixed period A-rate adjustment cap of 2% per year, but a lifetime cap of 9.5% significant fees hidden in the closing costs and interest only. Payment option for the first 5 years. In the current rising rate environment, they were facing a potential payment shock that could increase their monthly payment by over $3,000 when the fixed period ended. Worse, if they'd been making interest-only payments as the loan allowed, they wouldn't have built any equity in the home beyond market appreciation. I called Melissa immediately. "Have you been making interest-only payments?" "Yes," she admitted. Bradley said it was smarter to invest the difference in his cryptocurrency fund. He says we'll make more there than we would save in interest. I closed my eyes, trying to stay calm. "And how is that investment performing?" Her silence told me everything. "Melissa, this mortgage has some serious red flags. Your friend Jason didn't do you any favors. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off." "What do you mean?" I explained each problematic term in detail, calculating exactly what could happen to their payment in different interest rate scenarios. By the time I finished, Melissa was quiet. "I had no idea," she finally said. "Bradley just handled all of it. He said I was overthinking things when I asked questions." "This isn't your fault," I assured her. "These contracts are deliberately complicated. That's why I always taught my students to analyze the math, not just listen to the sales pitch." "What should we do?" "First, start making principal payments immediately," I advised. "Stop the interest-only approach. Then we need to look at refinancing options before rates climb any higher, even if it means taking the prepayment penalty hit." Melissa sighed. "Bradley will never agree. He trusts Jason completely and thinks this was the deal of a century." Thought for a moment. "What if we invite them both over? I can walk through the numbers objectively. No accusations, just mathematics." She agreed, though reluctantly. 3 days later, Bradley, Melissa, and Jason Thurman from Capital Mortgage Solutions sat at our dining room table. I had prepared a detailed spreadsheet and several graphs illustrating the potential outcomes of their current mortgage structure. Bradley was defensive from the start. "With all due respect, Richard, I don't think we need financial advice from a financially illiterate math teacher." I finished for him. "I understand, but humor me for 30 minutes. If my concerns are unfounded, I'll never mention your mortgage again." Jason shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He was younger than I expected, probably just a few years out of college. "Mr. Donovan, I can assure you that Bradley and Melissa received our premier mortgage product, specifically designed for upwardly mobile professionals." I smiled. "That's excellent news. Then you won't mind if we examine the mathematics behind this premier product." For the next 45 minutes, I walked them through each component of the mortgage, translating the legalese into clear financial implications. I showed how the interest-only payments were costing them equity. I calculated the potential payment increase when the fixed period ended. I highlighted the excessive fees buried in the closing costs. As I spoke, I could see Jason's confidence wavering. Bradley's expression shifted from dismissive to concerned. Melissa, who had already heard most of this from me privately, watched her husband closely. "This can't be right," Bradley finally said, turning to Jason. "You told me this was the best product for our situation." Jason cleared his throat. "It is an excellent product for certain financial goals. The interest-only option provides flexibility." "The interest-only option is financial quicksand," I interjected. "Let me show you exactly why." I pulled out a second spreadsheet comparing their current mortgage with a standard 30-year fixed mortgage at the rates available when they purchased their home. After 5 years with your current approach, you'll have paid nearly $260,000 in interest with zero principal reduction. With a standard mortgage at 6.2%, you would have paid more each month, but about $95,000 would have gone toward building equity. The room fell silent as they absorbed this information. But that's not the worst part, I continued. Let's look at what happens when your rate adjusts in year 6, assuming interest rates increase just moderately from current levels. The projections I showed them were sobering. Their monthly payment could potentially increase by over 40%, and if rates hit their caps by nearly 70%. Bradley's face had lost all color. Jason, did you run these scenarios for us? Jason shifted uncomfortably. Our standard practice is to discuss the basic terms. Most clients don't want to get into the mathematical details because most clients aren't financially literate enough to understand them, Bradley said quietly, the irony of his words clearly not lost on him. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, a small part of me was savoring this moment of recognition. The part of me that had been stung by being called financially illiterate at my own dinner table wanted to say, "Who's financially illiterate now?" But the teacher in me, the part that had dedicated his life to helping young people understand these very traps, knew better. The good news, I said gently, is that we've caught this relatively early. You have options, though none of them are painless. For the next hour, we discussed those options. Refinancing now would trigger the prepayment penalty, but might still be worthwhile given the trajectory of interest rates. Switching to principal and interest payments immediately would build equity, but require lifestyle adjustments. Selling the house and finding something more affordable would be a drastic step, but would free them from a potentially dangerous financial situation. Throughout the conversation, I noticed Bradley's demeanor changing. The defensive posture was gone, replaced by focused attention and thoughtful questions. Jason, realizing he couldn't counter the mathematics, eventually made an awkward excuse and left. When it was just the three of us, Bradley looked at me directly. "Richard, I owe you an apology. I was arrogant and disrespectful." I shook my head. "You don't need to." "Yes, I do," he insisted. "I called you financially illiterate because you didn't agree with my approach. But the truth is, I never really understood what I was signing up for. I trusted Jason because he was my friend, and I wanted to believe I was getting some inside advantage." Melissa reached over and took his hand. "The real financial literacy," I said carefully, "isn't knowing all the jargon or having the right connections. It's understanding the fundamental mathematics that governs every financial decision. It's being able to see past the sales pitch to recognize when something doesn't add up, literally." Bradley nodded slowly. "I guess I have a lot to learn." "We all do," I assured him. "Finance is constantly evolving. That's why I never stopped studying it, even after 30 years of teaching." As they gathered their papers to leave, Bradley paused. "Would you be willing to help us figure this out? I mean, really walk us through our options and help us make a plan?" The request surprised me, but it shouldn't have. Beneath the confident exterior, Bradley was still young, still finding his way, and now he was humble enough to ask for help. "I'd be honored," I told him, "but on one condition." "Name it," he said. "When you figure this out, and you will, you have to share what you've learned with someone else who needs it. That's how financial literacy really spreads." Bradley smiled, a genuine smile without any of the previous arrogance. "Deal." As they drove away, Sarah came to stand beside me on the porch. "Financial literacy lesson delivered?" she asked with a knowing smile. I put my arm around her shoulders. Sometimes the most important lessons are the ones that hurt our pride the most. Like being called financially illiterate by your son-in-law? Exactly like that, I admitted. But you know what? If that comment is what it took to get him to really look at their situation, then I'll gladly accept the insult. Sarah leaned her head against my shoulder. "You always were a teacher first." I nodded, watching their car disappear down the street. The truth was, I hadn't just taught Bradley a lesson today. He'd reminded me of something important, too, that financial literacy isn't about winning arguments or proving your superiority. It's about helping people understand the tools that can either build or destroy their financial future. And sometimes, the people who need that help the most are the ones who think they already know everything. The weeks following our mortgage intervention were transformative for my relationship with Bradley. What had begun as a tense confrontation evolved into something unexpected, a partnership. Bradley called me the very next evening. "Richard, I've been up all night looking through our finances. We're in worse shape than I thought." His voice carried none of the bravado that had characterized our previous interactions. Instead, there was a raw honesty that caught me off guard. "Tell me what you've found," I encouraged. "The cryptocurrency investments, they're down almost 70%. I kept telling Melissa they would bounce back, but..." He paused, and I could hear him taking a deep breath. I was in denial. This vulnerability from Bradley was new territory. "Financial setbacks happen to everyone," I assured him. "The question is what you do next." "That's why I'm calling. You mentioned refinancing options. I've started researching, but honestly, I'm overwhelmed. Every option seems to have hidden catches." "Now you're thinking like a financially literate person," I told him. "Skepticism is healthy when it comes to financial products." Bradley laughed, but it was a self-deprecating sound. "Ironic, isn't it? I work with complex legal contracts every day, but I couldn't see what was right in front of me with our mortgage." "Different skill sets," I replied. "That's why we rely on others sometimes." We agreed to meet that weekend. I suggested they come to my home office, where I had set up what my former students had affectionately called the financial laboratory. It was really just a spare bedroom with a large whiteboard, multiple calculators, and shelves of finance books I'd collected over the decades. When Bradley and Melissa arrived Saturday morning, they brought coffee and pastries from my favorite local bakery. It was a small gesture, but one that signaled a shift in our dynamic. "Welcome to the lab," I said, ushering them in. Bradley looked around at the bookshelves with titles ranging from The Mathematics of Debt to Probability Models in Financial Decision-Making. "You weren't kidding about studying finance for 30 years, he remarked, running his finger along the spines of the books. "Most of these were purchased with purpose," I explained. "Each time I encountered a financial concept I didn't fully understand, I'd buy a book and master it." "I wish I'd had that approach," Bradley said quietly. We settled at the table where I'd prepared several folders, each labeled with a different potential strategy. For the next 3 hours, we dissected their financial situation with surgical precision. Beyond the problematic mortgage, we uncovered several other issues. Bradley had been contributing only enough to his 401k to get the company match, while directing additional funds toward speculative investments. They'd been living slightly beyond their means, using credit cards to bridge gaps and assuming future income increases would solve any problems. The interest-only mortgage payments had created an artificial sense of affordability that masked their actual housing costs. As we mapped everything out, a clear picture emerged on the whiteboard, one that even Bradley, with his pride and optimism, couldn't deny. "It's like we've been building a financial house on quicksand," Melissa observed. Bradley nodded, his expression solemn. "And telling ourselves it was marble." I appreciated their candor. "The good news is you're both young, with excellent earning potential. This is fixable, but it will require some difficult decisions." We examined 3 potential paths forward, running the numbers for each scenario. First, the aggressive approach. Refinance immediately despite the prepayment penalty, drastically cut expenses, redirect all available funds to paying down high interest debt and temporarily max out retirement contributions to reduce taxable income. Second, the moderate approach. Switch to principal and interest payments on the current mortgage, refinance after the prepayment penalty period expired, reduce expenses, more gradually and systematically address their debt while maintaining moderate retirement contributions. Third, the strategic retreat. Sell the house, downsize significantly, eliminate all consumer debt with the proceeds, rebuild their financial foundation with a more conservative housing cost, and accelerate retirement savings. Bradley leaned back in his chair, studying the projections for each scenario. The aggressive approach puts us in the best position long-term, but those first 2 years would be brutal. That's the trade-off, I acknowledged. Financial decisions almost always involve balancing present comfort against future security. Melissa was studying the strategic retreat option. Selling the house feels like admitting failure, she said, softly. I understood her hesitation. It's actually the opposite. Recognizing when a financial decision isn't working and having the courage to change course, that's financial maturity, not failure. Bradley reached for her hand. We bought that house because I pushed for it. I was so focused on the address, the status, the idea of the perfect home. I never properly considered whether it was the right financial decision. What would you recommend, Richard? Melissa asked. I considered the question carefully. I can run the numbers and show you the mathematical outcomes, but this decision involves more than math. It's about your values, your goals, your tolerance for short-term sacrifice. If it were you, Bradley pressed, if it were me, at your age and with your earning potential, I'd go with the aggressive approach. 2 years of austerity for decades of financial freedom seems like a worthwhile exchange, but you have to live with this decision every day. They exchanged a look that contained an entire conversation. Then Bradley nodded. The aggressive approach. We want to fix this properly, not just apply a Band-Aid. For the next hour, we crafted a detailed implementation plan. I connected them with Stanley Griffin, a no-nonsense mortgage broker I'd known for 20 years who specialized in helping clients extricate themselves from predatory loans. We created a budget that would allow them to absorb the refinancing, costs, and higher monthly payments while still accelerating their debt payoff. As they were preparing to leave, Bradley paused at the door. Richard, can I ask you something personal? Of course. When I called you financially illiterate, how did you not lose your temper? If someone had said that to me, I would have... He trailed off, but I understood what he was asking. When you've taught high school for 30 years, you develop a thick skin, I explained. But more importantly, I've learned that people who make dismissive comments about others often do so from a place of insecurity. Bradley looked away, clearly uncomfortable with the insight. Besides, I continued, I knew that if you ever found yourself in real financial trouble, you'd need someone you could turn to without shame. If I'd responded with anger, I would have closed that door. You were playing the long game, he said with newfound respect. In finance and in relationships, I agreed. Over the following months, I watched with quiet pride as Bradley and Melissa implemented their financial reset plan. They refinanced with Stanley's help, securing a 30-year fixed mortgage at 6.4%, higher than their initial teaser rate but far better than what their arm would have adjusted to. The prepayment penalty was painful, but they recognized it as the cost of their financial education. They sold both their luxury cars, replacing them with reliable used vehicles. They terminated their country club membership, cut back on restaurants and travel, and embraced home cooking and local recreation. Bradley started bringing lunch to work instead of ordering in with colleagues. Melissa negotiated a substantial raise during her annual review, arguing convincingly for her value to the firm. Every Sunday afternoon, they would email me their updated financial spreadsheet, showing their progress in real time. I could see their debt decreasing, their savings increasing, and their net worth slowly beginning to climb. They never complained about the sacrifices, although I knew from Melissa that there were difficult moments. Friends questioning their lifestyle changes, Bradley's parents expressing concern about their financial troubles. About 4 months into their plan, Bradley's cryptocurrency fund experienced an unexpected resurgence following a regulatory announcement. His initial investment, which had been worth just 30 cents on the dollar, suddenly returned to near its original value. Called me immediately. "Richard, the crypto fund is back up. Should I cash out while I can?" The old Bradley would have doubled down, seeing the recovery as validation of his original strategy. The fact that he was calling me instead told me everything about how far he'd come. "What does your gut tell you?" I asked. "That I got lucky, and luck isn't a financial strategy." I smiled to myself. "Then I think you know what to do." He liquidated the entire position the next day, using the proceeds to eliminate their remaining credit card debt and establish a proper emergency fund. When his father questioned the decision, "You sold at the bottom of the hockey stick, son." Bradley stood firm. "I'm investing in financial security, Dad. The returns on peace of mind are consistently excellent." 6 months after our whiteboard session, Bradley asked if he could bring a colleague to the house for a financial intervention similar to what we'd done for him. The colleague, Trevor Wilson, was in even worse shape, with multiple high-interest loans and a negative net worth despite a 6-figure income. "Remember our deal," Bradley said. "I promised to pass on what I learned." That Saturday, I watched as Bradley confidently explained financial concepts to Trevor, breaking down complex terms into clear language, showing the same spreadsheets and calculations I had once shown him. He'd not only absorbed the information, but had developed his own way of communicating it effectively to others. As Trevor departed, visibly shaken but equipped with a concrete plan, Bradley turned to me. "I never truly understood what you did as a teacher until now," he said. That feeling when someone finally gets it, when the light bulb goes on, it's incredible. It never gets old, I agreed. Not in 30 years of teaching, and not now. By the 1-year mark of their financial reset, Bradley and Melissa had eliminated all consumer debt, established a 6-month emergency fund, increased their retirement, contributions to the maximum allowed, and even begun a modest brokerage account with low-cost index funds. Their mortgage, while still their largest expense, was now a conventional fixed-rate loan with no surprises lurking in the fine print. They invited Sarah and me to dinner at their home to celebrate this milestone. As we enjoyed a home-cooked meal instead of the catered affairs they used to host, Bradley raised his glass. "To financial literacy," he said, "and to the patient father-in-law, who never gave up on me, even when I insulted his intelligence." "I'll drink to the literacy part," I said with a smile. "The rest is water under the bridge." After dinner, while Melissa and Sarah were discussing an upcoming family wedding, Bradley led me to his home office. Unlike the impersonal, decorator-designed space it had been a year ago, it now contained a small whiteboard, a shelf of finance books, and a framed spreadsheet on the wall, their original financial reset plan with all its projections. "My own version of the lab," he explained. "Much smaller, but growing." On his desk was a folder labeled Wilson Financial Plan, alongside several others with colleagues' names. "How many people have you helped so far?" I asked, genuinely curious. 7, he replied. "Word has gotten around the firm that I'm the go-to person for financial straight talk. Turns out a lot of high-earning professionals are quietly drowning in bad financial decisions." "That doesn't surprise me," I said. "Our education system rarely teaches practical financial skills, and high incomes can mask poor financial habits for a long time." Bradley nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about how financial literacy isn't just about personal benefit, it's a form of protection against predatory practices. Jason knew exactly what he was doing with that mortgage. He did," I agreed. "But he could only do it because you didn't know what questions to ask." "Exactly," Bradley said, warming to the topic. "I've started volunteering at the community center near our office, teaching a basic financial literacy class. For young adults, most of them come from backgrounds where no one ever talked about money except to worry about not having enough. This was news to me. You're teaching financial literacy classes? He looked slightly embarrassed. Just once a month. Nothing compared to your career, but it's something. I felt an unexpected swell of emotion. Bradley, that may be the most impressive thing you've done in this entire journey. Really? More than fixing our financial mess? Absolutely. Helping yourself is necessary, but helping others is transformative. That's how real change happens. One person at a time, spreading knowledge instead of keeping it to themselves. Bradley was quiet for a moment. I keep thinking about all the people who don't have a Richard in their life. Someone who cares enough to tell them uncomfortable truths and then help them find a better path. Then it's a good thing they have a Bradley now, I told him. The transformation in my son-in-law over that year went far beyond his financial situation. The arrogance that had once defined him had been replaced by something much more valuable: confidence. Grounded in actual knowledge and tempered by humility, he still had ambitious goals and a strong personality, but now these qualities were directed toward meaningful growth rather than superficial status. Later that evening, as Sarah and I drove home, she commented on the change. You know, when you first told me about his financially illiterate comment, I was ready to give that young man a piece of my mind, but it seems like it all worked out for the best. Sometimes people need to hit a wall before they're ready to listen, I replied. I'm just glad the wall wasn't a complete financial collapse. You saw something in him worth saving, she observed. I thought about that. I saw someone who could become much more than he was, and he has. 2 weeks later, a large envelope arrived in our mailbox. Inside was a formal-looking certificate titled Award for Excellence in Financial Education, with my name printed in elegant script. A note from Bradley explained that his community center students had created the award and insisted he present it to me. They wanted to thank the teacher who taught their teacher, the note read. Without you, none of this would have happened. Beneath, the certificate was a stack of handwritten letters from his students, thanking me for the ripple effect of financial knowledge that had reached them through Bradley. They wrote about predatory loans avoided, savings accounts established, debt repayment plans initiated. Real people making real progress because knowledge had been shared. I carefully placed each letter in my desk drawer, more valuable to me than any official recognition I'd received throughout my teaching career. The following Sunday, Bradley and Melissa joined us for our regular family dinner. As we sat on the back porch enjoying dessert, Bradley mentioned that he'd been approached about teaching a financial literacy workshop at several other community centers. It's taking on a life of its own, he said, both excited and a bit overwhelmed. I'm not sure I'm qualified to scale this up. What do you need to make it happen? I asked. Curriculum materials, presentation slides, handouts for participants. I've been cobbling things together, but if this is going to reach more people, it needs structure. I smiled. I might have something that could help. I went to my office and returned with a well-worn USB drive. What's this? Bradley asked, turning it over in his hand. 30 years of financial education materials, I told him. Every lesson plan, worksheet, case study, and presentation I created throughout my teaching career. It's all yours if you want it. Bradley looked at the small device with awe. Are you serious? This is your life's work. It is, I agreed. And what good is a life's work if it ends when you retire? These materials should be used, not stored away in my office. He was speechless for a moment. I don't know what to say. Say you'll use it to help people. That's all the thanks I need. Later, as they were leaving, Bradley hung back for a moment. You know, when I called you financially illiterate that day, it was really me who couldn't read the signs. I couldn't see that success isn't about having the biggest house or the most impressive investments. It's about building security, independence, and ultimately the capacity to help others. I placed my hand on his shoulder. That's financial literacy at its finest, Bradley, and you're fluent now. As I watched them drive away, I reflected on how a single insulting comment at a holiday dinner had led to this unexpected journey, not just of financial correction, but of profound personal growth and community impact. Sometimes the most valuable lessons begin with the most painful moments. And sometimes, being called financially illiterate by your son-in-law turns out to be the start of something extraordinary. 18 months after Bradley's financial awakening, I received an unexpected phone call from Stanley Griffin, the mortgage broker who had helped Bradley and Melissa refinance. "Richard, I've got an interesting situation, and I immediately thought of you," Stanley said without preamble. We'd known each other long enough to skip pleasantries. "I'm listening," I replied, curious about what could prompt this call. "There's a community bank in Westfield that's being investigated for predatory lending practices. The state's attorney's office is looking for expert witnesses who can explain complex mortgage structures in terms a jury can understand." I leaned back in my chair, surprised by the direction of the conversation. "And you thought of me? You turned your son-in-law's financial disaster into a classroom. You've been teaching this stuff for decades. Plus, your former student Elaine Martinez is leading the prosecution team, and she specifically asked if I knew anyone who could translate financial jargon into plain English. Elaine had been one of my most promising students 15 years earlier. She'd written her senior project on predatory lending in low-income communities, foreshadowing her eventual career as a consumer protection attorney. "I'm retired, Stanley. I'm not sure I want to get involved in a legal battle." "Just meet with Elaine," he pressed. "Hear what they're up against. These folks were targeting first-time homebuyers, elderly retirees, immigrant families, people who trusted their local bank." The mention of vulnerable homebuyers struck a chord. Throughout my teaching career, I'd seen too many families devastated by financial traps disguised as opportunities. Even Bradley, with his law degree and privileged background, had fallen victim to predatory terms. "Send me her contact information," I finally agreed. "I'll talk to her, but no promises beyond that." 2 days later, I found myself in Elaine's office at the Massachusetts State Attorney's Office in Springfield. Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine as she welcomed me. "Mr. Donovan, it's so good to see you again," she said warmly. "You probably don't remember, but your financial mathematics course completely changed my career trajectory." "I remember your project on predatory lending," I told her. "Looks like you're still fighting that battle." Her expression turned serious as she gestured for me to sit. "It's evolved into something much more sophisticated, which is why we need your help." Over the next hour, Elaine outlined the case against Westfield Community Savings Bank. What had begun as a routine compliance audit had uncovered a systematic pattern of steering customers toward complex, high-profit mortgage products without adequate disclosure. The tactics were technically legal but ethically abhorrent: buried terms, confusing language, and aggressive sales tactics. "The challenge we're facing," Elaine explained, "is that everything is technically disclosed in the paperwork. The defense will argue that customers had all the information they needed to make informed decisions. But disclosure isn't the same as understanding," I noted. "Exactly." She slid a folder across the desk. "These are sample mortgage agreements from the bank. To you and me, the problematic terms might be obvious, but we need someone who can help a jury see how these documents are deliberately designed to confuse." I opened the folder and immediately recognized the structure: adjustable rates with deceptive teaser periods, balloon payments disguised in legal jargon, excessive fees hidden among legitimate closing costs. The same tricks that had trapped Bradley were being used on a mass scale, but with even more predatory elements. "This one," I said, pointing to a particularly egregious example, "contains a negative amortization provision buried on page 17. The borrower's principal balance would actually increase over time despite making regular payments." Elaine nodded. "And that homeowner is now facing foreclosure, unable to understand how they owe more than they borrowed after 5 years of payments. The end of our meeting, I had agreed to review the case materials and consider serving as an expert witness. The prospect of returning to work wasn't particularly appealing at my age, but the opportunity to protect vulnerable homebuyers from the same trap that had nearly ensnared my daughter's family was compelling. When I told Sarah about the case that evening, she studied me carefully across the dinner table. "You're going to do it, aren't you?" she asked, knowing me too well. "I haven't decided," I hedged, though we both knew otherwise. "Richard, I saw your face when you were talking about these mortgage agreements. You had the same look you used to get before school board meetings when you were fighting for better math education." I smiled at her accuracy. "Is that a bad thing?" "Not at all. Just don't pretend this is a difficult decision for you. You've spent your life teaching people to see through financial deception. This is just a different classroom." The next morning, I called Bradley to discuss the case, curious about his perspective as an attorney. "Expert witness testimony can be grueling," he cautioned after I explained the situation. "Defense attorneys will try to discredit you, question your expertise, make you second-guess yourself." "Sounds like teaching high school," I joked. Bradley chuckled. "Fair point. But seriously, are you sure you want to put yourself through this? You've earned your retirement." I considered his question, thinking about the families who had been misled by Westfield Community Savings. When I was teaching, I could only reach students in my classroom. This might help establish a precedent that protects thousands of homebuyers. "Then, I think you should do it," Bradley said decisively. "And I'd like to help if I can. Maybe I could review some of the legal aspects of your testimony preparation." His offer surprised and touched me. 2 years ago, Bradley would have scoffed at the idea of contributing his valuable legal expertise pro bono to a consumer protection case. The transformation in his values continued to impress me. For the next 3 months, I immersed myself in the case, working closely with Elaine's team. I analyzed dozens of mortgage agreements, created visual presentations that illustrated the hidden costs and risks, and practiced explaining complex financial mechanisms in straightforward language. Bradley proved invaluable, spending evenings and weekends helping me anticipate potential cross-examination questions and refine my explanations. He even took a personal day from work to accompany me to a mock testimony session, where he played the role of an aggressive defense attorney with unsettling authenticity. "You need to be ready for them to attack your credentials," he warned after a particularly intense practice session. "They'll try to paint you as a high school teacher who doesn't understand sophisticated financial instruments." "That sounds familiar," I remarked, raising an eyebrow. Bradley had the grace to look embarrassed. "Yeah, well, I've learned a lot since then, including how easily sophisticated can be a cover for predatory." As the trial approached, something unexpected happened. News of the case spread through Bradley's financial literacy network, and people began to contact Elaine's office with their own stories of misleading mortgage practices. What had begun as a case focused on Westfield Community Savings expanded to include evidence of similar tactics at other institutions. The most powerful moment came when Bradley's student, Trevor Wilson, stepped forward with documentation of his own predatory mortgage, which had been originated by a loan officer who previously worked at Westfield. His willingness to publicly share his financial mistakes provided a crucial link in establishing a pattern of behavior that extended beyond a single institution. "I never would have understood what happened to me without Bradley's class," Trevor told Elaine in his deposition. "And he wouldn't have been teaching if his father-in-law hadn't shown him what real financial literacy looks like." The night before the trial was set to begin, Bradley, Melissa, Sarah, and I gathered at our home. The atmosphere was tense but determined. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Melissa said, raising her glass, "you've already changed lives with this case. More people are examining their mortgages and asking the right questions because of the publicity." "To asking the right questions," Sarah agreed, clinking her glass against Melissa's. and to the unexpected journeys that begin with uncomfortable truths, Bradley added, looking at me with sincere appreciation. The trial itself lasted 3 weeks. I spent 2 full days on the witness stand, methodically walking the jury through the deceptive elements of the mortgage agreements. The defense attorney, as Bradley had predicted, tried to portray me as unqualified to evaluate sophisticated financial products. Mr. Donovan, wouldn't you agree that a high school mathematics teacher lacks the specialized knowledge required to assess complex banking products? He asked dismissively. I've taught the mathematical principles behind these products for 30 years, I replied calmly. Compound interest doesn't change because the paper it's calculated on has a bank logo. A few jurors smiled at that, and I continued with growing confidence. These aren't sophisticated products. They're basic mathematical operations obscured by unnecessary complexity. That complexity isn't accidental. It's strategic. It's designed to prevent borrowers from making informed comparisons. When the defense attorney tried to overwhelm me with industry jargon, I used his tactics to illustrate my point. You've just used 5 different terms to describe a simple interest calculation, I noted. That's exactly how these mortgage documents confuse borrowers by using specialized language to disguise straightforward concepts. The turning point came when Elaine presented my side-by-side comparison of how the mortgage terms were presented versus how they could have been explained. Clearly, the contrast was stark and compelling. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Westfield Community Savings Bank was found liable for deceptive practices. The judge ordered them to modify all existing predatory loans to conventional terms and establish a restitution fund for borrowers who had already lost their homes. Outside the courthouse, Elaine addressed a small group of reporters, crediting the outcome to the courage of the borrowers who had come forward and the clarity of the expert testimony. When she tried to usher me toward the microphones, I declined, preferring to remain in the background. As we were leaving, an elderly woman approached me hesitantly. "Excuse me, are you Richard Donovan?" she asked. I nodded, and she continued. "My name is Dorothy Keller. The bank foreclosed on my home last year. The attorney says I might get it back because of what happened in court today." Her eyes filled with tears as she reached for my hand. "Thank you for helping people like me understand what they did to us. I thought I was just stupid for not understanding the paperwork." "You weren't stupid, Mrs. Keller," I assured her. "The system was designed to be confusing, but that's changing now." As she walked away, Bradley appeared at my side. "That's why we did this," he said quietly, "for the Dorothy Kellers of the world." I nodded, too moved to speak. The case's impact extended far beyond Westfield. In the months that followed, state regulators implemented new disclosure requirements for mortgage lenders. Several other banks voluntarily reviewed their lending practices, modifying loans that might have attracted similar scrutiny. Elaine was promoted to lead a new financial crimes division within the state attorney's office. For me, the most meaningful outcome wasn't the verdict or the policy changes. It was watching my son-in-law continue to evolve as a champion for financial education. Bradley expanded his community workshops into a formal nonprofit, the Financial Literacy Foundation, which provided free education to vulnerable communities. He recruited attorneys from his firm to volunteer their expertise, reviewing contracts and loan documents for participants. 6 months after the trial, Bradley invited me to attend a foundation event at a community center in one of Springfield's lower-income neighborhoods. The room was packed with people of all ages, many taking notes as a panel of experts discussed common financial pitfalls. Bradley spotted me at the back of the room and waved me forward. "Everyone," he announced to the audience, "I'd like you to meet the person who inspired all of this. My father-in-law, Richard Donovan." The crowd applauded as I reluctantly joined Bradley at the front of the room. He put his arm around my shoulders, a gesture that would have been unimaginable 2 years earlier. Richard taught me that financial literacy isn't about complex investments or getting rich quick, Bradley told the audience. It's about understanding the basic mathematics that governs every financial decision we make. It's about seeing through the jargon to recognize when something doesn't add up. I recognized my own words from our first serious conversation about his mortgage, now repeated with genuine conviction. Before I met Richard, Bradley continued, I thought I knew everything about money because I had plenty of it. I called him financially illiterate because he didn't agree with my approach to investing. But when my own financial house of cards started to collapse, he was the one who showed me what real literacy looks like. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room, and a few people chuckled. So today, I want to announce something special, Bradley said, his voice taking on a formal tone. The Financial Literacy Foundation is establishing the Richard Donovan Scholarship Fund to support students who demonstrate exceptional mathematical aptitude and a commitment to consumer protection. Each year, we'll provide college tuition assistance to 5 students who pledge to use their skills to fight financial exploitation in their communities. The announcement caught me completely by surprise. As the audience applauded, I felt a wave of emotion that was difficult to contain. This was a legacy beyond anything I could have created on my own. A continuation of my life's work through future generations. Later, as Bradley and I shared a quiet moment before leaving the community center, I tried to express my gratitude. Bradley, the scholarship fund, it's too much. I don't know what to say. He smiled. 2 years ago, I wouldn't have thought twice about spending that money on a luxury car or a vacation property. Now I understand its true value, the potential to change lives through education. You've come a long way from the young man who thought a 5-1 arm with hidden penalties was a great deal, I observed. I had a good teacher, he replied simply, one who saw beyond my arrogance to my potential. As we walked to our cars, Bradley shared his vision for expanding the foundation's work to other states, creating a network of financial education centers focused on practical mathematics and consumer protection. We're implementing everything you taught me, he explained enthusiastically. Breaking down complex concepts into understandable language, emphasizing the fundamental mathematics, creating real-world examples that resonate with people's experiences. It sounds like you've become quite the teacher yourself, I noted with pride. Bradley nodded thoughtfully. I've discovered something you've known all along. There's no greater satisfaction than watching someone grasp a concept that can change their life. Before we parted ways, Bradley handed me a small wrapped package. A token of appreciation, he said. Open it when you get home. Later that evening, Sarah watched as I unwrapped the gift, a custom-made paperweight with an inscription etched in elegant script. To Richard Donovan, who taught me to read between the lines. Thank you for showing me what true financial literacy looks like. It's come full circle, hasn't it? Sarah remarked, reading the inscription over my shoulder. I nodded, running my finger across the words. From an insult at Thanksgiving to a mission that's helping hundreds of families, life takes unexpected turns. Speaking of unexpected, Sarah said, Melissa called while you were out. She and Bradley have some news they want to share in person. They're coming for dinner this weekend. When Sunday arrived, Bradley and Melissa appeared at our door with matching expressions of barely contained excitement. After dinner, as we settled in the living room with coffee, they exchanged a look before Bradley spoke. We wanted you both to be the first to know, he began, reaching for Melissa's hand. We're expecting a baby in January. Sarah immediately rushed to embrace Melissa, while I shook Bradley's hand, congratulating him on the news. There's more, Melissa added when the initial excitement had calmed. We've been thinking about what kind of parents we want to be, what values we want to instill. Bradley picked up the thread. And we've realized that one of the greatest gifts my parents gave me was financial security. But one of the greatest, Dice's was not teaching me how money actually works. We don't want to make the same mistake. So, Melissa continued, We're establishing a trust for the baby with a twist. Instead of simply handing over money at some arbitrary age, the trust will be structured as a financial education journey. They'll gain access to different portions of the trust by demonstrating understanding of increasingly complex financial concepts. Bradley leaned forward, clearly passionate about this approach. We want our child to understand both the mathematics of money and its purpose, not as a status symbol or a scorecard, but as a tool for security and for helping others. I listened to their plan with growing admiration. They had designed a thoughtful approach that balanced generosity with responsibility, privilege with purpose. And we'd like you to be the trustee, Dad, Melissa added, the person who assesses whether the financial literacy milestones have been met. I was speechless for a moment, deeply moved by their trust in me. I would be honored, I finally managed. We can't think of anyone better to guide the next generation, Bradley said sincerely. After all, you managed to teach financial literacy to the most arrogant student you've ever had. Second most arrogant, I corrected with a smile. There was a young man in 2003 who thought he could outmath the stock market with his graphing calculator. As laughter filled the room, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 2 years. What had begun with a thoughtless insult had evolved into profound growth, not just for Bradley, but for me as well. In retirement, I had found a new purpose, first through helping my son-in-law understand his mortgage, then through the court case, and now through this trust that would shape my grandchild's financial education. Later, as Bradley and Melissa prepared to leave, Bradley hung back for a private word. You know, Richard, when I called you financially illiterate, it was the biggest mistake of my life, he admitted. But it was also the beginning of the most important education I've ever received. Some lessons start with mistakes, I replied. The important thing is what we learn from them. As I watched them drive away, I thought about the child who would join our family in a few months. A child who would grow up with a fundamentally different understanding of money than either of their parents had. A child who would learn from the beginning that financial literacy isn't about impressing others or accumulating wealth, but about creating security and opportunity, both for yourself and for those around you. And all of this because an arrogant young man had once called his father-in-law financially illiterate. Sometimes the most unfortunate comments lead to the most fortunate outcomes. Sometimes an insult is the beginning of a journey that transforms not just a relationship, but an entire community. That's the unexpected power of financial literacy. It begins with numbers, but ultimately, it's about people. January arrived. With a snowstorm and the birth of my first grandchild, Emma Grace Carson, 7 pounds, 3 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and her mother's determined chin. Standing in the hospital room, watching Bradley cradle his daughter with a mixture of awe and terror, familiar to all new parents, I felt the peculiar telescoping of time that comes with witnessing the continuation of generations. She has your eyes, Richard, Bradley observed, looking up from the bundle in his arms. Sarah squeezed my hand. Donovan eyes. They see right through nonsense. Let's hope so, I replied softly. The world has plenty of nonsense to see through. In the months following Emma's birth, I watched Bradley navigate fatherhood with the same intensity he'd applied to reforming his finances. He and Melissa adjusted to parenthood's demands while maintaining their commitment to the financial literacy foundation. They took turns attending evening workshops, bringing Emma along to weekend events in a front carrier, introducing her to the community they were building before she could even focus her eyes properly. The foundation itself was flourishing, beyond our expectations. What had begun as Bradley's small community workshops had expanded to include weekly classes in 4 different locations, a mentor program pairing financially savvy volunteers with families working to improve their situation, and specialized courses for seniors targeted by predatory schemes. 6 months after Emma's birth, Bradley approached me with an unexpected proposal. The foundation has received a significant grant, he explained over lunch at a quiet cafe near my house. Enough to hire a full-time education director. That's wonderful, I said sincerely. You've worked hard for that recognition. Bradley set down his fork and looked at me directly. We want you to consider taking the position. The offer caught me completely off guard. Me? Bradley, I'm 70 years old. Age is irrelevant, he countered. Your experience is exactly what we need. The foundation is growing faster than we anticipated, and we need someone who can develop a comprehensive curriculum, train volunteers, and maintain educational standards. Sounds like running a math department, I observed. Exactly, Bradley nodded. Something you did successfully for decades. Plus, after your testimony in the Westfield case, you've become something of a celebrity in consumer protection circles. Your name lends credibility. I took a moment to consider the proposal. The idea of returning to work at my age wasn't something I'd contemplated. Yet the prospect of shaping a program that could help thousands of families avoid financial pitfalls held undeniable appeal. What would this involve exactly? I asked, not committing but not dismissing the idea either. Bradley outlined a role that sounded tailor-made for my skills, developing course materials, training instructors, establishing measurable outcomes for program effectiveness. The position would require about 30 hours per week, with flexibility to work from home when desired. This isn't charity, he emphasized. We need your expertise. The foundation will benefit more than you will. I'll need to discuss it with Sarah, I told him. This would affect our retirement plans. Bradley smiled. Of course, take all the time you need. But Richard, he paused, his expression earnest. I think you might enjoy being back in the classroom, even if it's a different kind of classroom. That evening, Sarah and I sat on our back porch, watching the summer sunset as we discussed Bradley's offer. You want to take it? Sarah observed after I'd explained the details. It wasn't a question. Is it that obvious? She laughed gently. Richard, your eyes light up when you talk about teaching. They always have. Retirement has been good for your golf game, but I know you miss making a difference. It would mean less time for us, I pointed out. Less flexibility for travel. Sarah considered this. True, but we've had 3 years of unstructured retirement. We've taken cruises, visited the national parks. Maybe it's time for a new chapter. 2 weeks later, I accepted the position as education director for the Financial Literacy Foundation. My first day in the small office space they'd leased downtown, I found a nameplate on the door reading, Richard Donovan, Chief Financial Literacy Officer, and a desk adorned with fresh flowers and a card signed by all the foundation's volunteers. The transition back to working life was both challenging and invigorating. The foundation's rapid growth meant systems needed to be established. Volunteers needed training, and curriculum needed standardization. I found myself drawing on not just my mathematical knowledge, but all the administrative skills I'd developed running a high school department. One of my first initiatives was to create assessment tools to measure the program's effectiveness. Rather than focusing solely on financial knowledge, I developed metrics that tracked behavioral changes, reduction in high-interest debt, increase in savings rates, adoption of protective financial practices. We're not just teaching concepts. I explained to the volunteer instructors during our first training weekend. We're changing relationships with money. Success isn't measured by what people know, but by what they do differently. By the end of my first year as education director, the foundation's impact was becoming measurable. Participants in our core program showed an average 22% reduction in consumer debt, a 31% increase in regular savings, and a 17% improvement in credit scores. More importantly, they reported decreased financial anxiety and increased confidence in making financial decisions. The success attracted attention from policymakers. State Senator Alicia Mendez attended one of our community workshops and was so impressed that she invited me to testify before a legislative committee considering a bill to mandate financial education in public schools. Mr. Donovan, Senator, Mendez began after I'd presented our program data. Your foundation's results are remarkable. What makes your approach more effective than traditional financial education? The difference is in how we frame the challenge, I explained. Traditional financial education treats financial literacy as an academic subject, definitions to memorize, formulas to apply. We treat it as a life skill, like nutrition or first aid. We focus on practical application in people's actual circumstances. And how would you implement this approach in schools? Another committee member asked. Financial concepts should be integrated across the curriculum, not isolated in an elective course that many students never take. Mathematics classes should use real financial scenarios in problem solving. History should include the evolution of economic systems. Even language arts can incorporate analysis of marketing and contractual language. The committee's questions continued for nearly an hour, exploring implementation challenges, teacher training requirements, and potential curriculum structures. By the end of the session, Senator Mendez had asked me to serve on an advisory committee to develop a statewide financial education framework. As I left the State House that afternoon, Bradley was waiting by his car to drive me home. "How did it go?" he asked eagerly. "They seemed receptive," I said, sliding into the passenger seat. The committee chair asked me to join an advisory group on curriculum development. Bradley grinned as he pulled into traffic. From being called financially illiterate to advising the state on financial literacy education. That's quite a trajectory. I chuckled at the irony. Life takes unexpected turns. "Speaking of turns," Bradley said, taking a different route than I expected, "I hope you don't mind a quick detour before heading home." 20 minutes later, we pulled up in front of a stately brick building near the city center. A banner across. The front announced Grand Opening Carson Donovan Center for Financial Education. I turned to Bradley in confusion. "What is this?" "The Foundation's new headquarters," he explained, clearly enjoying my surprise. "The board voted unanimously on the name. Come see inside." The interior had been transformed from what appeared to have been an old bank building into a modern education center. The main floor featured classroom spaces, a resource library, and consultation rooms. The original bank vault had been converted into a children's area with age-appropriate financial games and activities. "This is remarkable," I said, taking it all in. "How did you manage this?" Remember Trevor Wilson, my colleague who testified in the Westfield case? His law firm represents a technology company that was looking for a meaningful community investment. When they heard about our work, they donated the building and renovation costs. As Bradley led me through the space, I noticed photographs lining the main hallway, images of workshop participants, volunteer instructors, and community events. At the end of the hall hung a large framed document, which I recognized as the mortgage agreement from Bradley and Melissa's original house purchase, complete with all its problematic terms highlighted in yellow. "Our origin story," Bradley said, noticing my attention on the document. "Every person who walks through these doors should understand that financial literacy isn't just for people who are struggling. Even successful professionals can be taken advantage of if they don't understand what they're signing." The center's official opening took place 2 weeks later, attended by community members, local officials, and media representatives. As Bradley addressed the gathered crowd, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. How a thoughtless insult at a holiday dinner had sparked a movement that now stood poised to impact thousands of lives. Emma, now 15 months old, toddled around the reception in a tiny dress, charming everyone she encountered. Watching her, I wondered what her relationship with money would be like as she grew up with these values at the center of her family's life. That question was partially answered the following week when Bradley and Melissa invited Sarah and me to dinner to discuss Emma's financial education trust. "We've finalized the structure," Bradley explained as he handed me a leather portfolio containing the trust documents. "Emma will receive distributions at key life stages, but each is tied to demonstrating specific financial competencies. I reviewed the carefully crafted milestones they had established. At age 8, Emma would receive a small sum after demonstrating understanding of basic savings concepts and completing a simple budgeting exercise. At 13, a larger amount would be available after she showed proficiency in comparing financial products and recognizing marketing tactics. At 16, funds for education or entrepreneurship would be released after she created a personal financial plan and demonstrated understanding of investment principles. At 21, a substantial distribution would come after completing an advanced financial literacy assessment and creating a philanthropic strategy. The final distribution at 25 would require Emma to demonstrate comprehensive financial management skills and a commitment to financial education for others. "This is extraordinarily thoughtful," I commented, impressed with the framework they'd created. "The focus on both knowledge and values is perfect." "We don't want money to just be handed to her," Melissa explained. "We want her to understand its potential and its limitations." Bradley nodded. "My parents gave me everything without teaching. Me anything. I had resources without wisdom. Emma will have both." The trust established a formal role for me as financial education trustee, responsible for assessing whether Emma had met each milestone before distributions were made. It was a responsibility I accepted with profound gratitude, a chance to influence my granddaughter's financial understanding in a structured way that would continue even after I was gone. As the Carson Donovan Center's programs expanded, my role evolved to focus more on curriculum development and less on day-to-day operations. I began writing a comprehensive financial education textbook aimed at high school students, incorporating the practical, application-focused approach that had proven so effective in our community workshops. The manuscript attracted attention from major educational publishers, and eventually, Westridge Educational Press offered a contract with plans to distribute the book nationally. The advance was substantial, but more meaningful was the opportunity to extend our approach beyond the reach of our local programs. "You're going to be a published author," Sarah remarked when I shared the news. "Will you finally admit that retirement doesn't suit you?" I laughed, acknowledging the truth in her gentle teasing. "Maybe retirement isn't the right word for this phase of life. Redirection might be more accurate." Around the time I was finishing the textbook manuscript, the foundation received an unexpected opportunity. A major financial services corporation, facing regulatory scrutiny over its lending practices, approached us about developing a consumer education program as part of a settlement agreement. Bradley brought the proposal to me with mixed feelings. On one hand, it's substantial funding that could expand our programs nationally. On the other, are we helping them fulfill a legal obligation without real change to their practices? It was a legitimate concern, one that reflected how far Bradley had come in his thinking about corporate responsibility and financial ethics. "Let's propose something more ambitious," I suggested. "Rather than just creating educational materials with their logo attached, let's insist on changes to their actual lending processes, simplified disclosures, plain language agreements, clear comparison tools for consumers." Bradley's eyes lit up at the idea. "Using their settlement funds to force actual reform in their practices. It's brilliant, if they'll agree." To our surprise, the corporation's new CEO embraced the proposal. Having witnessed the industry's reputational damage from predatory practices, she saw an opportunity to position her company as a leader in transparent, consumer-friendly financial services. The resulting collaboration created a new standard for mortgage disclosure documents, a single-page summary that clearly explained key terms, potential payment changes, and total costs over the life of the loan. What began as a compliance exercise evolved into a competitive advantage as customers responded positively to the transparency. Other financial institutions began adopting similar approaches, not from regulatory pressure but from market demands. As consumers increasingly expected and selected providers offering clear, understandable terms, the incremental shifts suggested a broader change in the industry, one driven not just by regulation, but by evolving consumer expectations. On Emma's second birthday, Bradley and Melissa hosted a small celebration at their home. After cake and presents, Bradley took me aside to share a development he was particularly proud of. "I've been working with Senator Mendez's committee on a state bill that would require all mortgage lenders to provide standardized disclosure documents," he explained, showing me a draft of the legislation on his tablet. "It's based on the model we developed with National Financial Services." "That's significant progress," I noted, reviewing the requirements outlined in the bill. "Industry-wide standards would protect countless homebuyers." Bradley nodded. "The bill includes funding for financial education programs in communities with historically high rates of predatory lending. If it passes, the foundation would be eligible to receive grants to expand our workshops." "When is the vote scheduled?" I asked. "Next month. Senator Mendez thinks it has strong bipartisan support. Financial literacy isn't a partisan issue. Everyone has seen the economic and social costs of financial exploitation." As we rejoined the party, I watched Emma attempting to count the coins in the piggy bank she'd received as a gift. At 2, she couldn't comprehend the value of money, but she was already being introduced to the concepts that would shape her relationship with it throughout her life. Melissa knelt beside her daughter, patiently helping her stack the coins by size. "These are for saving," she explained simply. "We save some, we spend some, and we share some." The foundational lessons were already beginning, presented in age-appropriate ways that would evolve as Emma's understanding grew. She would never experience the financial confusion that had characterized Bradley's early adulthood, or the financial insecurity that plagued so many of the families who came through the foundation's doors. Later that evening, as Sarah and I drove home, she commented on the changes we'd witnessed over the past 3 years. "When you think about it," she mused, "that financially illiterate comment might be the most productive insult in history. Look at everything that's grown from that moment." I smiled at her observation. It's a reminder that sometimes the most painful interactions contain the greatest potential for growth, if we're willing to move past the initial hurt and look for the lesson. "And if we're fortunate enough to have someone who cares enough to teach us," Sarah added, squeezing my hand. The next morning, I received an email from a former student I hadn't heard from in decades. Marcus Jenkins had been in my very first class as a young teacher, a bright but troubled student who had struggled to see the relevance of mathematics to his life. "Mr. Donovan," his message began, "you probably don't remember me, but I was in your math class in 1983. I just saw an article about your financial education center and wasn't surprised at all. You were teaching us about loan amortization and compound interest when other teachers were just having us memorize formulas without context. That class changed my direction. I became an accountant instead of dropping out, and now I'm teaching accounting at a community college in Arizona. I tell my students about you all the time, about how you made the math real. Just wanted you to know that your approach to financial mathematics made a difference long before you had a center named after you." As I read his words, I felt the full circle of influence that defines a teaching life. How lessons shared decades ago continue to resonate through generations, touching lives far beyond our immediate reach. That's the true power of education. It creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see or measure, influencing decisions and shaping perspectives long after the initial instruction. And financial literacy, perhaps more than any other subject, has the power to transform not just individual lives but entire communities, breaking cycles of exploitation and replacing them with informed choice and economic empowerment. All of this reflection from a hastily delivered insult at a Thanksgiving dinner, a moment that could have driven us apart, but instead became the catalyst for connection, growth, and meaningful change. Life's most important lessons often come disguised as challenges to our pride. The question is whether we're willing to look past the hurt to find the truth beyond, and whether we're fortunate enough to have people in our lives who care enough to show us what literacy really looks like. 10 years after Bradley's infamous financially illiterate comment, I found myself sitting in an auditorium at Westfield State University, watching my granddaughter Emma deliver a presentation that brought everything full circle. At 12 years old, Emma had inherited her mother's analytical mind and her father's persuasive abilities. For the middle school financial literacy competition, she had chosen to analyze predatory student loan practices targeting first-generation college students, a topic that connected directly to the work both Bradley and I had pursued over the past decade. The average 18-year-old signing student loan documents receives less than 20 minutes of explanation about terms that will affect the next 20 years of their financial life, Emma explained to the judges with surprising poise. My research shows that simplified disclosure requirements could reduce default rates by 26%. Beside me, Bradley leaned over and whispered, "She didn't get that from my side of the family." The Carson approach was always, sign now, worry later. I smiled, remembering how far we'd come from those early days. After Emma's presentation earned first place, we celebrated at a local restaurant where she proudly displayed her trophy. "Grandpa, did you know they're using your textbook in high school now? My math teacher recognized our last name and asked if we were related." "The Donovan financial empire expands," Bradley joked, but the pride in his voice was unmistakable. The foundation. Work that had begun with Bradley's community workshops had evolved in ways none of us could have anticipated. While the Carson Donovan Center continued its direct education programs, our most significant impact had come through an unexpected channel: technology. 3 years earlier, Bradley had collaborated with a team of developers to create the Financial Clarity app, which allowed users to scan mortgage documents, loan agreements, or credit card terms and receive an instant analysis in plain language. The app highlighted potentially problematic clauses, explained obscure terminology, and calculated the true costs hidden within complex fee structures. Initially launched as a free tool for Foundation participants, the app had gone viral after a consumer protection blog featured it. Within months, it had been downloaded over 2 million times, with users regularly sharing stories of how it had helped them avoid predatory agreements or negotiate better terms. "The app was a game changer," Melissa observed as she joined our conversation. "We're reaching people who would never attend a workshop or read a financial guide. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome was yet unfolding. The day after Emma's competition, Bradley invited me to his office for what he described as an important conversation. When I arrived, I found not just Bradley, but also Trevor Wilson and Martin Collins, the CEO of National Banking Corporation, one of the country's largest financial institutions. "Richard," Bradley began after introductions, "Martin has an interesting proposition for us." Collins, a trim man in his 50s with a surprisingly informal manner for someone running a trillion-dollar bank, leaned forward. "Mr. Donovan, your family's work in financial education has created a ripple effect throughout the industry. The Financial Clarity app in particular has forced institutions like mine to reconsider how we present information to consumers." "That's gratifying to hear," I replied, curious about where this was heading. "Initially, many banks saw the app as adversarial," Collins admitted. "It was exposing terms we'd intentionally made difficult to understand. But the market response has been undeniable. Consumers are demanding transparency, and the institutions providing it are gaining market share." Bradley picked up the thread. "Martin's team has proposed a partnership. They want to integrate a version of our analysis tools directly into their application process, allowing customers to see plain language explanations before signing. And not just mortgage documents," Collins added. "Credit cards, personal loans, investment products, everything with terms that might confuse the average consumer." It was a stunning proposal. One of the nation's largest banks voluntarily embracing transparency rather than fighting against it. The skeptic in me wondered about ulterior motives. "Why the change of heart?" I asked directly. "Banking has profited. from complexity for generations. Collins nodded, acknowledging the challenge. 3 reasons. First, regulatory pressure is increasing. We can lead the change or have it forced upon us. Second, our research shows that customers who fully understand their financial products are more satisfied and less likely to default. And third, he paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. I have a personal stake in this. He reached into his briefcase and removed a folder, sliding it across the table to me. Inside was a mortgage document with familiar terms, an adjustable rate with a deceptive teaser period, hidden fees, and prepayment penalties. My parents lost their home to foreclosure when I was in college, Collins explained. This was their mortgage. I didn't understand the terms then, and neither did they. I've carried this document for 30 years as a reminder of what financial illiteracy cost my family. The authenticity of his story was evident in his expression. This wasn't just a PR move. It was personal for him, just as it had become personal for Bradley. We're calling it the Clarity Commitment, Bradley explained. A pledge that every financial product will be explained in plain language, with all costs and risks clearly disclosed. National banking is willing to be the first signatory, with a commitment to implement the standards across their entire product line within 18 months. If we can demonstrate that transparency is good business, Collins added, others will follow. Competition works both ways. It can drive a race to the bottom in terms of exploitative practices, but it can also drive improvements when customers demand better. The proposal evolved into the Financial Clarity Initiative, a coalition of consumer advocates, financial institutions, and technology companies committed to transforming how financial information is presented to consumers. What had begun with Bradley's mortgage troubles had grown into a movement with the potential to affect millions of financial decisions each year. 6 months after that meeting, I stood on stage at the Financial Services Industry Conference, an unlikely venue for a retired math teacher. The auditorium was filled with banking executives, regulators, and fintech innovators, all gathered to witness the official launch of the Clarity Commitment and the coalition of 12 major financial institutions that had agreed to implement its standards. As I approached the podium, I caught sight of Bradley and Melissa in the front row. Bradley gave me a thumbs up, his expression a blend of pride and amusement at the improbable journey that had brought us here. 10 years ago, I began. I was called financially illiterate by my son-in-law after expressing concerns about his mortgage terms. A ripple of laughter moved through the audience. That moment could have ended with wounded pride and strained family relationships. Instead, it became the catalyst for a conversation about what financial literacy truly means. I glanced at Bradley, who nodded encouragingly. True financial literacy isn't about knowing specialized terminology or having the right credentials. It's about transparency, the ability to see clearly what you're agreeing to and what it will cost you. It's about fairness, ensuring that complexity isn't used as a tool to disguise unfavorable terms. And most importantly, it's about accessibility, making financial knowledge available to everyone, regardless of background or education. The journey that had begun with a painful comment at a family dinner had led to this moment. Industry leaders voluntarily committing to standards that would make financial products more understandable for millions of consumers. As the first bank CEO signed the Clarity Commitment Pledge, I thought about Emma, who would grow up in a world where financial information was increasingly designed to be understood rather than to confuse. The combination of education and transparency would empower her generation in ways previous ones could only have imagined. After the ceremony, Bradley found me in the reception area. "Not bad for a financially illiterate math teacher," he said, with a grin. "And not bad for an arrogant young attorney who couldn't read his own mortgage terms," I replied, returning his smile. We had both been transformed by that confrontation years ago. Bradley discovering the value of financial fundamentals, and me finding a purpose that extended far beyond retirement. The insult that could have driven us apart had instead created a partnership that neither of us could have anticipated. Emma's already talking about studying consumer economics in college, Bradley told me as we walked toward the exit. She says she wants to build on what we've started. I felt a profound sense of satisfaction at the thought of our work continuing through another generation. The best legacy isn't money or property, I observed. It's values that endure and evolve. Sometimes life's most important lessons begin with uncomfortable truths. Sometimes the people who challenge us most directly are the ones who help us grow most meaningfully. And sometimes, being called financially illiterate by your son-in-law is the beginning of a journey that changes not just your family, but an entire industry. The insult had been the spark. Everything that followed, the education, the foundation, the app, the coalition, had grown from our willingness to move past that initial moment of conflict toward something constructive. That's the true measure of literacy, not just the ability to read the words on the page, but the wisdom to find meaning beyond them, and the courage to let that meaning change you. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.